Good afternoon. I'd like to call the special meeting of the Williamsburg City Council meeting together. Ms. Felico?
Mr. Rogers?
Here.
Ms. Ramsey?
Here.
Mayor Pons?
Here.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Here.
Mr. Councilman Maslin's on a call. So with that, is there a motion?
Yes, Mayor Pons. I move that City Council approve Councilman Maslin's request to participate in this meeting electronically.
Second.
Ms. Felico?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Also, we have consideration of approval for
Sorry, that says.
consideration of approval of appointments to the boards and commissions. Is there a motion?
Sure. I move that City Council appoint Nina Simone to fulfill the unexpired term of James Axtell on the Williamsburg Regional Library Board of Trustees that ends on 6/30/2021, and Hong Chang Thomas Liu to the Social Services Advisory Board for a term expiring 6/30/2024.
Second.
Ms. Felico again.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Ted, are you there? Okay. So moving forward to item number 4 on our agenda is the public hearing, a public hearing to consider the removal of the Confederate monument in Bicentennial Park. Mr. Trivett?
Thank you, Mayor Pons. We're going to start off with just a brief history on the issue, and I think Attorney Shelton's going to provide that.
So around 1905, the United Daughters of the Confederacy began soliciting funds to erect a monument to Confederate soldiers and sailors of the city of Williamsburg and James City County. At that time, the Williamsburg City Council and James City County Board of Supervisors each contributed $500 for the purchase and erection of the monument. The UDC raised an additional $500 in private donations. In 1908, the City Council authorized the placement of the monument on Palace Green, and it was erected in 1908. In 1932, when Palace Green was sold to the Williamsburg Holding Company, the monument was moved to in front of the courthouse property on South England Street, and it remained there until 1969. When the courthouse moved to Court Street in 1969, the monument was again moved to in front of that courthouse. The courthouse was then subsequently moved again in 1999 to Monticello Avenue, and at that time they were not interested in the monument moving to the courthouse property, so it remained in its location on Court Street until the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation purchased that property. UDC then requested that the monument be moved to Bicentennial Park, and City Council approved that request on May the 11th of 2000. And since then, the monument has remained in Bicentennial Park. So the section of the state code that governs monuments is 15.2/1812, and that was amended by this session's General Assembly to authorize localities to decide whether they want to remove, relocate, contextualize, or cover a publicly owned monument or memorial. There's a process for doing that. The process requires that a public hearing be held, and so there's 3 steps. The first is that the public hearing be advertised, and that occurred in the paper on June 13th of 2020. Then City Council is required to hold a public hearing, and after the public hearing, City Council can decide whether they want to leave in place, remove, relocate, contextualize, or cover the monument. Once City Council makes that decision, if City Council decides to remove, relocate, contextualize, or cover, then the city is required to advertise again and offer the monument to a historical society, a museum, a government, or a military battlefield. And at that point, then, the monument can be moved. After that advertisement has been given for 30 days, I would say that monument can be moved.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, we also want to make sure the council and the public is aware that since advertising the public hearing, we have received a request from the United Daughters of the Confederacy to take possession of the monument. They have asked the city to consider providing some cost to help them with the removal and then replacement of the monument at a different location, and asked for enough time for them to make those arrangements. So they have requested that we consider giving them until January the 31st of 2021 to find a new home for the monument, if that's the desire of council. And I believe we do have some representatives from the UDC here today to address council.
Excellent. Are there any questions for city attorney or city manager?
I just had one. Ms. Shelton, just so I'm clear, so James City County has no remaining interest based on their original support of the monument?
James City County abandoned their interest in the monument in 2000 when it was moved to Bicentennial Park.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
No, not at this time.
Okay, so we have a big stack of speakers card. I'm excited to see that there's a lot of people interested in city government. As you all can tell, we have a full house. Not only is this room filled, but we have some members of the community that are in an adjoining room. We are obviously staying separated for reasons of health associated with the COVID-19 virus. So bear with us as we go through this. We want to make sure that everybody who wants to speak has the opportunity to speak. It was going to be my goal to allow everybody in this room first to have the ability to speak, and then because of technical delays and everything, we will shift to the other room. So I have some speakers cards, some of which may be in the other room. And so if I don't see you stand, I'll set those aside and then we'll address those. And if you haven't submitted a speaker's card, you're still welcome to speak. And again, I'll give that opportunity to you all in this room first, and then we'll go to the members in the other room. So please, when you come forward, state your name, your address, and address your comments to council only. We want to make sure that this is a civil conversation, and I expect it will be. Try to limit your comments to 5 minutes. I would much appreciate that.
Mayor, if you don't mind, we'd like to take just a minute to try Mr. Maslin one more time.
Certainly.
Hello.
Ted, are you with us?
Yes, I'm with you, and I'm watching you on the video.
Okay. We're going to begin the public hearing now. I'm sorry you missed the opportunity to ask any questions of staff. We'll give you another opportunity at the conclusion of the public hearing. Okay, so I'm going to call some names. If I butcher your name, please accept my apologies in advance, but we'll begin with Zoe Dare. So please come forward and speak at this podium here. Okay, so I'm going to call some names. Welcome. Please.
My name is Zoe Adair. I live at 1330 South Mount Vernon Avenue. I lived here for 2 years. And I will not take this full time. I just simply need to say that Mayor, this monument can, should, must, and will be removed. It should never have existed in the first place. It has no place here or anywhere else. Any and all arguments to the contrary are rooted in a misunderstanding of history so dire they can only stem from willful ignorance or flat-out racism. I implore you to view this as a first step, and a first step only. Removing this statue is necessary, and also removing this is as symbolic as it is necessary. Dismantle the symbol of oppression, and then dismantle the system of oppression in every form it takes. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Next, we have T. Hotzen.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, my name is T. Hotzen. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a born and raised Williamsburg community member. I'm here today, dear Mayor and City Council Chair. I'm here today as somebody who was born and raised in this community to support the removal of Bicentennial Park's Confederate monument, as well as oppose the plan to gift this statue back to the Daughters of the Confederacy at the city's expense, which could very well allow this monument to be visibly re-erected and harder to remove. This monument is part of the Lost Cause movement, which is a racist, pro-slavery legacy in which white Southerners like the United Daughters of the Confederacy recast the history and values of the Old South in a nostalgic, romantic light and attempted to erase the region's white supremacist foundation. As a city committed to the well-being of all of its residents, Williamsburg should not allow this monument or this movement to exist, let alone pass back into the hands of those who created it. It should be destroyed. This is not erasing history, but rather reckoning with it publicly and introducing it to the values of the present. I ask you to support this anti-racist cause as only you, our community's representatives, can. Please remove the monument and either destroy it or relegate it to a location in which it is not publicly visible. This is the very least we as a community can do and is a symbolic gesture at best. Let it be the start of our work against racism and an entry point into our reckoning with Williamsburg history. Yours, T. Hotzen.
Thank you. Hugh Newton, excuse me. Again, please state your name and address when you come to council.
My name is Hugh Newton. I live at 682 Counselor's Way in Williamsburg. I have two great-great-grandfathers who both were from Williamsburg, were Confederate soldiers, joined almost immediately after Virginia seceded from the Union. They both survived and then returned to Williamsburg, one of them starting Casey's department store. I think that Williamsburg should consider seriously the request by the United Daughters of the Confederacy to take possession and make a decision on that monument. I think it's a piece of Williamsburg history that certainly has to be contextualized. It tells a story, and we should accept it as that. It is not a monument of some general on a horse with a sword. It's meant to honor the men and women who served, and I think it should be given the opportunity to be contextualized and retained at the discretion of the original donors, being the United Daughters of the Confederacy. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, I have Nick Belazuzza. Please state your name and address when you come forward, please.
I'm Nick Beluzzo. I live at 101 Baden Drive, Williamsburg, Virginia. I just tapped to start.
No, it'll start on its own.
Thank you, Mayor, for the opportunity to provide comments before you today. I represent a group of graduate students, just under 30 at last count, from William and Mary's Departments of American Studies, Anthropology, and History. With professional academic experience in the management and interpretation of our collective heritage, we feel that we can provide a useful perspective not otherwise represented. We've submitted by email a larger analysis of the Williamsburg Confederate Monument. However, I'd like to summarize a few of those key points today. Many of those who argue against the removal of monuments suggest that doing so is historical revisionism at best and the erasure of our shared history at worst. We argue that this is not true. History is constantly revised, incorporating newly discovered facts while reanalyzing this data from new perspectives. Like science, history should be revised when new data is encountered. Faulty hypotheses and inaccurate histories should be rejected based on new and more accurate information. By all accounts, yes, historians revise history. However, the results of these careful, peer-reviewed revisions is a more accurate, nuanced history. Revisions do not erase history, they improve upon it. On the issue of monuments, we argue that monuments are not history. Rather, they are commemorations of selected aspects of history designed to highlight a particular perspective. They are often ineffective at explaining and describing the history they claim to represent. Yet, Confederate monuments do speak to history, just not the history of the Civil War. Rather, they speak to the history of the rise of Jim Crow, of discrimination and exclusion, not only from politics, but from control of the public spaces in which these monuments reside. Confederate monuments served two purposes. The first purpose was part of a broader rehabilitation of the image of the Confederacy in the post-Reconstruction South known today as the Lost Cause. These monumental commemorations are part of a constructed narrative of the Civil War. For instance, a commemoration poem for the Williamsburg Monument suggests that, in regards to the failure of the Confederacy, quote, "Our fairest hopes have faded away." They were designed to obscure the history of the war and its causes while undermining newly emergent black political power. The consensus of historians is clear on this. The second purpose was to reify the post-Reconstruction legal order during the Jim Crow era. This is exactly why so many monuments stand in front of courthouses, visual reminders that white supremacy had returned to the South and that black people no longer had a say in the political process. It is not a coincidence that the idea for the monument in Williamsburg originated in 1902 during a meeting of Confederate veterans, the same year that a new state constitution disenfranchised black people through poll taxes, literacy tests, and the segregation of public schools. As part of a larger reframing of the prevailing political order, these monuments were not erected through public dialogue. They explicitly excluded black voices. And even at the time of their construction, Confederate monuments were not without controversy. An 1890 article on the Lee Monument in Richmond argued that, quote, "In the name of every patriotic impulse, such things shall not be tolerated." In 1931, W.E.B. Du Bois suggested that Confederate monuments commemorate the perpetuation of human slavery. In brief, opposition to Confederate monuments is neither new nor novel. The current staff recommendation before the City Council is that the monument should be gifted to the United Daughters of the Confederacy, or UDC. And the sample motion suggests that the taxpayers of Williamsburg should pay for this relocation to a site of the UDC's discretion. We strongly oppose these suggestions. In 1932, the City Council wouldn't spend public funds on the relocation of the monument, and we would argue, doing so now using the limited taxpayer dollars to support further commemorations of the Confederacy, would support further commemorations of the Confederacy. If the UDC is to take possession, they should fully fund the removal themselves. Further, it should not be allowed to be put back up on public display, albeit on private property. We encourage you to actively incorporate black voices into the discussion of the appropriate final disposition of the monument. That being said, it is not for us to decide what the appropriate disposition is. The black descendant community of Williamsburg, who have long been excluded from these dialogues, should lead these discussions. In closing, we ask you to reflect on an 1890 editorial by John Mitchell, Jr., a black member of Richmond City Council who opposed the construction on Monument Avenue. In discussing the black workers hired to install the Lee Monument in Richmond, Mitchell stated that, quote, "He put up the Lee Monument, and should the time come, we'll be there to take it down." We urge you, Mayor, to consider the black voices which have been institutionally suppressed, in part by these monuments themselves, in deciding not just the issue of removal, but also the final disposition of the monument. If history is our aim, the monument should be appropriately and accurately recontextualized by historians based on an inclusive dialogue that amplifies black voices. Thank you, Mayor, and the rest of the council for your time and consideration in this important discussion.
Thanks so much. Next, I have Patricia Gray.
Good afternoon. I was very proud of my city when I heard that the City Council was going to take up this question, so I congratulate you all on acting quickly.
It's great. If you could just state your address as well, please.
Oh,
for the
I'm
record.
sorry. Patricia Gray, and I live at 107 John Tyler Lane.
Thank you.
I think that the biggest obstacle that I feel is that, or the reason to do this, is that this is a painful situation for people who have had to be deeply affected by the Confederate problem. When I joined the Black Lives Matter march last month, I didn't know that we were going to march to the Confederate Memorial. But when I got there and I saw that there was this attribution around the base of the obelisk to who had put it up and on what basis, I could understand that this was very objectionable to many people. That day, it was really very crowded, and I couldn't read all of the text that was around it. But I went back the next day and looked at it more carefully. I want to say that an obelisk in Egypt, where it originated, was a monument that was connected with the sun god. And it was supposed to be an idea of life and light and warmth. It had nothing to do with war or tragic events. So it's not as if it was a man on a horse. It's a very different kind of monument. So I started thinking about it, and I thought that rather than removing that, would be good to consider the idea of either removing all of the text around it or covering it with some other material that could be inscribed in a different way. And I think it could be a very valuable monument to justice and peace. And I'm sure that the people in the Black Lives Matter movement could come up with what they felt was an appropriate text. And then it could be rededicated in a very public ceremony to the community, the Black community who have lived in this city and helped to build this city over the last 400 years. That park is not a very well-used park, but I walk by it very frequently, and it's very rarely that I see anyone in the park. And maybe it could become a place that was more vital and vibrant in the community with a totally new meaning. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Next I have Bonnie Calbearer. Please state your name and address for the record.
Yes, I'm Bonnie Calbearer, 232 Jefferson's 100, Williamsburg. And I ask that the council consider the following points as it determines the fate of the small monument in Bicentennial Park. All wars have casualties, and this monument is a memorial to those soldiers and sailors from Williamsburg and JCC who died in that war. Nothing about it, including the text, glorifies the Confederacy. The monument is not a Williamsburg attraction. After coming to Williamsburg frequently for 30 years and being a resident for 9 years, I've only learned of the monument in the park a couple of years ago when it was mentioned in a Virginia Gazette article. Williamsburg communications specialist Leanne Hartman has said, "I doubt most people remember it. I doubt most people even know about it." The cost to move and perhaps store the monument, time of government officials and taxpayer dollars, might be better spent on addressing major issues such as having a well-trained and equipped police force and to place assurances for equal treatment of all under the judicial system. Finally, I kind of leave you with this question. Would leaving this small monument, perhaps contextualized, where it would serve as a reminder of the past we do not condone, and help us focus on the future that we do want? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next I have Angie Wiley. Thanks for spelling it out phonetically. State your name and address, please.
My name is Angie Wiley. I live at 205 Braemar Creek in Williamsburg. Good afternoon, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to express my thoughts on removal of the Confederate statue here in the city. I am a resident of James City County and proud to call this area home. The debate over Confederate statues and symbols has never been as vocal as it is now. This is a time of reflection and change that is long overdue, and I applaud you for addressing the issue in the prompt manner that you have. I know the pain that Confederate symbols bring to the African American community, and I feel a moral obligation to speak out for what is right and just. We all have a moral obligation to do what is right and move this country towards a more perfect union. No matter what some will try to say is history that should stand, we all know that these statues were built many years after the Civil War, during the Jim Crow era. What does that say to you? Segregation, separation, and supremacy. These were the true purpose and meaning, and that fact cannot be denied. And this is why they must be removed from our city streets and parks. I urge the city to take action and either destroy it or move it from Bicentennial Park to a museum or a cemetery. This is not the end all, rather it's just the beginning of steps needed to heal our country's past wrongs and move in a better direction for our future and our children. Many more changes need to follow to ensure justice for all citizens, which I also encourage the city to continue to pursue. I urge the city of Williamsburg to expedite the removal of this statue. Let's make Williamsburg a place where all residents feel welcomed, respected, and valued. I trust that you will do the right thing. Thank you.
Next, I have John Michael Edward Reich.
My name is Michael Reich. I live in 376 Merrimack Trail, Williamsburg, Virginia. Thank you, Mayor and council members, for allowing me to make my comments today. I really do feel most likely everyone's probably already made their mind on this, but I'm just going to tell about my journey and trying to see how I feel about this. Because as a veteran myself, I am torn, even for the losing side, for memorials. Sometimes I understand why all the individuals, but sometimes it's a little more complicated when it comes to large memorials that are just made for entire veterans. So I decided to look into the history of this particular monument and also look at the arguments for and against it. So the history was explained earlier that it was 1908 Daughters of the Revolution placed this monument. A few years later, it was placed outside of a courthouse. It stayed outside of the courthouse till 2000s. So usually for arguments for a war memorial of some sort, usually you want to have it where the actual battle occurred. In this instance, it would be the Battle of Williamsburg, where we lost a lot of our soldiers. Few arguments for why this monument doesn't make sense where it is or why it should even stand now. For the majority of its history, it stood in a place where even though black people represented anywhere from 10 to less than 20% of the total population in the last 50 years, represented anywhere from 40 to as high as 70% of the total arrest rate, depending on the year. So when people passed by that, they would have to see a flag that reminded them of the good old days, the flag. And in 2000, whether or not we want to admit it, the city decided in its arrogant ways to move it to a quiet park, even though where it's out of its way. So what are some arguments for still keeping it up? Taking it down could revise history. Are we going to forget history when we take it down? We don't remember monuments, or we don't remember history through monuments. We remember it through textbooks. We remember it through the passing down of histories. I've been to places where they take down monuments. When I went to Iraq, this was a few years after they took down all the Saddam Hussein statues, and people were worried about going down. Now, it's a little bit different situation there, but I guarantee, I know that none of those people have forgotten all the atrocities that they went through. Statues are not a reminder of history. They're there for a reminder of oppression. We put up monuments to decide who we want to give praise to, what our society glorifies at that moment. At this history, society has changed. We are no longer glorifying the ways that we used to treat people who don't look like us. We are no longer trying to glorify how we feel. And as far as it being a war monument, the place where it occurred now is not actually where the Battle of Williamsburg happened. I've been to several redoubts where the Battle of Williamsburg is, and it is hardly taken care of. If we actually say we want to take care about how we reflect on the history of the Battle of Williamsburg, then why are we fighting so hard for this one monument, but not taking care of the actual place where people lost their lives at? Other arguments for why people would want to keep this, give me a second, I'm sorry, I have this. Another argument to show support for local populace, the descendants of those people who live there. Where the monument is now, there's not that many people who actually have people from Confederate people who were from James City County. Most of the people who pass through there are tourists, college students, who a large portion of that population have either no ties to the Confederacy nor support any of the ideas of it and want a reminder of it. And those who did have ties to it should probably have the monument actually moved to a place where they can grieve their ancestors in something like a graveyard or the actual battle site. As far as changes, as far as rewriting history, or losers don't have monuments, there are definitely places where, you know, Napoleon or people who actually played a part in that people's current culture still stands. But there's a difference between having a statue that stands that actually represents that culture and one that just is a reminder of the dark past. This statue was not put up as a reminder or a memorial. This statue was put up as a way to keep people down. Even the quote that is on there, which is from the recessional from Richard Kipling, "Lord God of hosts, be with us yet, lest we not forget, lest we forget." That is a clear call sign to the belief of the lost cause, even though technically the poem was actually against imperialism, but still, the actual quote itself is something that is usually used for remembering lost cause. Let us not forget why we really fought. Let us not do that.
5 minutes is up, thank you for your time.
Thank you. I do want to say, as far as the new home, if we go to the Dollars of Revolution, we should, if you do want them to do it, you should at least make sure that they either A, put in an actual war monument, or B, put in, otherwise we just tear it down or revise it.
Thank you.
Sorry for going over my time.
Thank you, sir. Next we have Elaine Moser.
Elaine Moser, 6864 Arthur Hills Drive. I live in the county. I don't have as eloquent statements as some of these people have made. I agree with most of them. My only point is, I think it's very inappropriate to have on public land, maintained by public dollars, a memorial to people who fought and killed fellow citizens so that they continue such an offensive practice. I think it should be removed. I don't think 1 cent should go to the Daughters of the Confederacy or whatever they are to help them put it up somewhere else. It should just go. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Clay Clemon. Welcome, sir. If you can state your name and address, please.
Clay Clemens, 600 Counselors Way in Williamsburg. I lived in this area for about 40 years, and actually among a few people who use Bicentennial Park just about every day, because it's very popular with my dogs, for obvious reasons. And it's sort of hard to believe after this much time that it's the first opportunity I've really taken to speak about the colossal contradiction at the middle of Bicentennial Park, which is, after all, dedicated to the 200th anniversary of American independence, which we associate with Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, the most eloquent statement ever written of individual liberty, rights, and freedom. There's a small plaque to that event in the Liriope there, barely visible, overshadowed by this gigantic monument invoking God's blessing on the lives of soldiers and sailors who fought for a system that its own founders, unlike many of its modern-day apologists, admit was founded on the opposite principles of the Declaration of Independence, on the basis of racial superiority. Those who want to keep the monuments and the memorials will often tell us they preserve history, But in fact, we don't need them to preserve history. That's already been pointed out by a number of people. And we don't normally do that in other circumstances. After all, in this same area, we had thousands of people, practically 100 years prior to the Civil War, who fought against American independence, American colonists who fought against George Washington. Nowhere in the United States is there a monument or a memorial to the Loyalists. And nobody worries that we will forget the American Revolution. And if they do, I don't think they think the answer is a statue to Benedict Arnold in Bicentennial Park. We don't need statues to the Loyalist cause. Remember history, we don't need those to the Confederate cause. And these aren't, as has been pointed out by a number of people, really about history. They're about a sanitized version of history. Sanitized version that's been around far too long, the kind of gallant race, armies fighting a northern invader, wouldn't let them peacefully secede. Unquestionably, many of them were gallant, all too many of them were boys. But it's time we stopped treating the Civil War as if it were some kind of college bowl game between two regional rivals, and the Southern team just couldn't keep up in the fourth quarter. It was an assault on the Constitution. It was a violation of the freedoms of people. And of course, it didn't start as, but became a war for the liberation of a people. We should want these memorials out of our public parks and spaces, not just because some people find them divisive, but because we all agree that they don't embody what we believe in as Americans. In addition to not really being genuine history, they're also really primarily about politics, which again has been pointed out. The time frame in which they're erected underscores that. When they were erected at the time of Jim Crow, it was a kind of reminder that the Confederacy had really been resurrected from the ashes, and that there would always be a knee on black people's necks in the South in particular, but in the country as a whole. So they've really been as political as the graffiti that somebody splashed on them a couple of weeks ago. We don't choose what's in our heritage, but we choose what we can do with our heritage. And maybe it's time we finally restored Bicentennial Park to its original purpose. The American Constitution was not perfect. Founders were flawed human beings, but at least, unlike the Confederacy, it was a redeemable system of government. And it has been redeemed by great leaders from Lincoln to Martin Luther King, by ordinary citizens from the Civil Rights Movement to the Black Lives Matter movement, and by soldiers, by African-American soldiers from all around this area who flocked from their plantations in the 1860s to fight for their freedom, at far greater risk to their lives, because of course that gallant rebel army didn't tend to take black people prisoner. Those who, for some reason, can't bring themselves to say Black Lives Matter are almost always prone to counter all lives matter. Well, if that's true, maybe if we're going to keep this obelisk, let's certainly sandblast off this inscription and replace it with one that's true to history and true to that idea. To all people in Williamsburg who suffered under slavery and in the war that ended it.
Thank you, sir. Next, I have Larry Gaskins. Good afternoon, sir.
My name's Larry Gaskins, 108 Harwood Circle. Thank you. I recently visited the Bicentennial Park and took note of the natural beauty and serenity of this place. Within the city environs, it offers a place of quiet refuge from the daily routines of life. As a location of the Galt family cemetery, as well as various sculptures and the subject Confederate monument, it could very well be referred to as a memorial park. The Confederate monument was erected by the city of Williamsburg and the Daughters of the Confederacy in 1908 in memory of the sons of this town who fought in the Civil War. No doubt many of these people were personally acquainted with some of the veterans and their families. The monument is a simple obelisk on a base with inscriptions on three sides identifying the history, purpose, and a prayer, Lord of hosts, be with us yet, lest we forget, lest we forget. This monument, located in such a peaceful, out-of-the-way place, is unlike other statues, some of which feature warriors on horseback wielding sabers. By its simplicity of design, non-prominent location, and statement of dedication, the monument is intended not to glorify, but to memorialize. I would therefore urge the council's vote to retain this monument at its present location. And if I may add, at the base of the monument, on 3 sides, there are inscriptions. One side is left blank. To me, that seems to be maybe an invitation to contextualize this monument with an appropriate inscription. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, I have Kevin Burgesale, Circle. Carmen?
It's Karen Bergsogel, 201 Penniman Road. Thank you, Mayor and council members, for giving me an opportunity to comment on what I'd like to see in our community. The monument that you're considering removing was erected over a century ago by a group of women who were probably quite a bit like me. They were misguided. They should have listened to General Robert E. Lee, who, in an 1869 letter to David McConaughey, wrote, "I think it well, moreover, not to keep open the sores of war, but to follow the examples of those nations who endeavored to obliterate the marks of civil strife and to commit to oblivion the feelings it engendered. It should never have been erected, and we should remove it." But this is just symbolic. It's easy to remove a memento of our troubled past and of racial division in our country. What's not easy is to do the hard work of actually creating racial justice. I hope that we will not sit back and complacently pat ourselves on the back for our progressive views, but will instead work for real equality in our community. Reform is needed in criminal justice, housing, education, healthcare, employment, and environmental policies, so that all citizens have equal access and outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Edith Hurd. Welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Edith Hurd. I was born in Williamsburg at 309 East Scotland Street. Been here all my life. And I want you all to know you need to move it. In 1960, the class of 1961 from Bruton Heights, we did a demonstration in front of this monument, asking them to remove it then. They did not. And we've had to live with this. So this is my second term, hoping you will move this. To destroy it, no. But I think we should put it maybe in Bruton Parish Cemetery where the other Confederate soldiers are, because there are quite a few of them there. If not, I think you should allow the daughters to do what they choose to do with it. But we need to remove it. And when we demonstrated, the class of 61, in front of the courthouse, I think it was Judge Taylor that came out and threatened to arrest us if we didn't go back to school. So please do something this time, because I don't have much time left. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hurd.
Thank you.
Next, I have Mr. Oscar Blayton. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. My name is Oscar Blayton. I live at 115 Chinquamin Lane. In the county, I also represent Colonial Williamsburg that owns property on Scotland Street and Braxton Court. These following facts should not be in dispute. The monument is to honor Confederate soldiers who were commanded by Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis, who had both been West Point graduates and U.S. Army officers, and who both took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, and who both broke that oath by entering into armed rebellion against the United States. Armed rebellion is treason. treason is a felony, and treason by definition is a villainy. In Villainy in Western Culture by Gregory Kendrick, the author writes of treason: to the present day, the betrayal of one's country by overthrowing its government remains one of the most heinous forms of villainy. It is so serious and offensive that it is the only crime other than, other than impeachable high crimes and misdemeanor addressed in the U.S. Constitution. Given these facts, there should be no doubt that Robert E. Lee, Jefferson Davis, and the men who followed them were treasonous villains. A demonstrable desire to honor these people who killed thousands of U.S. soldiers evidences the greatest lack of American patriotism. There are those who would argue that Lee and Davis did what Washington and Jefferson did some 40 and some years before them. But the difference is that our social compact with Britain was broken by the American victory. The armed rebellion of the South failed, and the social compact among the states held. Had the American Revolution failed, Washington would have been hung. The Southern resurrection failed, and Lee and Davis are both lucky that they were not hung for the felonious oath breakers and treasonous villains that they were. Finally, on the issue of slavery, every rebellion stated that the aim of the every state that was in rebellion stated that the aim of the rebellion was to maintain white supremacy and chattel slavery for black people. This sentiment is borne out by the fact that just about almost every, if not every, piece of paper money issued by the Confederacy depicts slavery. I refer you to a book titled Confederate Currency, The Color of Money by John W. Jones. This monument does not preserve history, it distorts it and frames traitors to America as heroes. It is an attempt to hijack history through a false historiographical narrative. If Williamsburg wants to honor treasonous villains who killed U.S. soldiers to keep a race of people enslaved, then shame on Williamsburg. Also, I would like to respond to a gentleman who said it's a memorial to our local dead in the Civil War. There were plenty of African Americans who fought in the Civil War. At the end of the Civil War, there were more black men in blue uniforms than there were in the entire Confederate Army at that time.
Mr. Blayton, if you can address council.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
at that time. There was no mention of any African American soldier on that monument. It was clearly an effort to maintain white supremacy and to oppress the black race. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next I have Sue Tarley. Welcome.
My name's Susan Tarley. I live at 112 Yorkshire Drive. Mayor Pons, members of City Council, I'm here today to ask and urge you to follow staff's recommendation and remove the monument. Removal of the monument doesn't stop those who want to memorialize their ancestors who fought in any war. All of us in this room probably have someone in our family who fought in a war and who died possibly in that war. That doesn't stop you from memorializing them. But the glorification of a war that oppressed others in our society is something that we really do have to address. I think it's time for us, and I will say us as a white person, to listen to our black brothers and sisters. We need to hear their pain. We need to hear the oppression that they've experienced. We need to hear what this monument means to them. They are part of our community. We are all part of this community. And I think it's time. It's been time. And I think that right now you have a great opportunity to act on this and remove that statue. It has no place here. It really is very divisive. I think you hear that today. But I also urge you to listen to our Black brothers and sisters who are going to address you today and hear what they have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next, I have Robert Bradenham. State your name and address for the record, please.
Thank you. My name is Robert Bradenham. I live at 305 East Tazewell in James City County. I was raised in Williamsburg. I went to local schools here, Matthew Whaley and James Blair. Later went to college at William & Mary, was in the Army for 3 years, and came back and went to law school here. My father was even the second or third dentist in Williamsburg after World War II, the first being Polly Stryker. I have spent the last 35 years as a federal prosecutor for the Eastern District of Virginia, prosecuting federal crimes for the Department of Justice. I have viewed this obelisk since a small child here in Williamsburg. I've always referred to it and looked at it as a tombstone, not as a memorial glorifying anything, any kind of philosophy. And by what I've heard from people say here, I don't think many people have actually gone out and seen this monument. I'd urge people to do that. To me, it's a small monument to people from James City and Williamsburg that served in the Confederate Army and in the Confederate Navy. It doesn't glorify any clause. It doesn't glorify any leader. It doesn't have a guy on a giant horse up there. It's very small. It's been placed in a very insignificant area. Most people had no idea what it was until the controversy has arisen on this. I've considered it to be, it's a beautiful obelisk, the way the artwork on there and the care that was given to it. And it remembers the Confederate veterans between 1861 and 1865. Regardless of what your decision is, to tear it down, to destroy it, grind it up, move it, or add to it, history is not going to change the fact that Williamsburg, Virginia, was in a Confederate state in 1861 to 1865. People that lived in this state and lived in Williamsburg were either they chose to go into Confederate service, or they were chosen to go into the Confederate service because of where they lived. It was a regional war. Now, in 1861, most males between the age of 16 and 45 were in the Confederate military. I say today, if it was 1861 today, most males in this room would be in the Confederate Army, or they wouldn't be in Virginia. Now, to me, this monument is very innocuous. It's placed in a place of peace and calm, and it deserves to be kept there. Deserves to be kept there. I make the analogy to another monument that's rarely seen in Virginia, or seen in Williamsburg, is the Vietnam Memorial out in another park in Williamsburg or James City County, honoring the 19 or 20 people from Williamsburg, James City County, and parts of York County that died in Vietnam. Their names are listed. It doesn't go into the fact that how unpopular this war was, how it was protested against, how people did everything they could to get out of serving in that. These people did not. it honors them for their service, not for the cause. Ironically, we still honor presidents, incompetent presidents who were responsible for the Vietnam War. They still name ships after them, and they're still honored as great men. History cannot be redone. History cannot be redone, regardless of how hard you try, how many monuments you tear down, how many monuments you move, how many you paste over. History is history. We tend to forget that when pressure is put on elected bodies to make a change like this. I earnestly urge Council to keep the monument where it is. Let people who want to enjoy it go enjoy it.
Brandon, your time has expired.
Thank you. I just finished.
All righty. Perfect timing then. Next, I have Mr. John Tarley.
Members of Council, John Tarley, 112 Yorkshire Drive. I sincerely thank you for bringing up this issue. As Ms. Edith said earlier, it's been a long time coming, and I respectfully request that you follow staff's recommendation. A little context, I've heard many references to it's in an out-of-the-way place. When this monument was put in, according to staff's report and my own investigation, it was on Governor's Palace lawn. That wasn't inconspicuous, and it was only moved when Williamsburg Holdings, the now Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, purchased that area and said, we don't want it. So where did it go? It went in front of our courthouse. And then when the courthouse moved, it went in front of the courthouse again. So we as lawyers walked past that monument to Confederates. When we moved the courthouse to Monticello Avenue, the monument didn't come because the judge didn't want it there. I appreciate that. So from the context of where it is, it's inconspicuous. It was there, as stated earlier, for a sign of oppression. My colleague Brian Smalls, City of Williamsburg resident and local president of the branch of the NAACP, wrote to Council, and I just wanted to quote a little bit from his letter. The removal of this monument is a symbolic gesture that we are trying to move on and heal an open wound in our nation's history. But it's just that, it's a symbolic gesture. I implore each and every one of us to go beyond acts of symbolism and do the hard work of actual change to the societal impediments that for too long have been accepted. So I join Mr. Smalls in my appreciation that Council brought this up and that the Council, and I ask that the Council follow the staff's recommendation, but it is just a first step in recognizing our own local history of oppression, of suppression, of forced relocations of our black families, and discrimination that has harmed our friends and neighbors for generations. We need to make amends, and this is a first step. There's a long way to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tarley. Next, I have George Garina. Good afternoon, sir. State your name.
I'm George Greenia. I live at 636 Counselors Way in Williamsburg. I'm a professional historian, retired from the faculty at William & Mary, 40-year resident of Williamsburg. I have visited, hundreds of historic sites which suffered during changes in regime and religion. Most of them have plaques that start out from these ruins, or one can imagine, or once upon a time, except you usually can't imagine. Even the willing visitor is baffled and wonders what the fuss was about. We are living through anxious moments, basically helpless before a pandemic, and we're also at an inflection point in American history concerning race and economic justice. Politics seem to be in the mix there somewhere too. We're all desperate to show some decisive gesture of solidarity that we're on the right side of history. We ought to keep in mind that in all of America, Williamsburg is a trusted custodian of national memory. Acre per acre, we may be responsible for a higher concentration of deep history than anywhere outside of Washington, D.C. We're famous precisely because we preserve the past so future generations can see it and touch it for themselves. Today's issue concerns memorials to the dead in Bicentennial Park. I would urge restraint before any change is made to them. What we call Bicentennial Park is really Bicentennial Memorial Park, and there are at least 4 symbols of remembrance there now. The dominant feature of the entire green space is a private cemetery to the Galt family, pioneers in mental health care. There are 3 other funerary tributes: a recently installed Blue Star Memorial, the funerary obelisk, and a small dogwood planted in the 1980s near the northwest corner as an AIDS memorial. Full disclosure, I assisted in dedicating that dogwood, and we agreed to leave it unmarked to forestall anti-gay vandalism. No gravesite, real or symbolic, should be disturbed. The park belongs to the city, but it is only used for private enjoyment. We stage no public events there. Like Cedar Grove Cemetery, we preserve it as a dignified open-air retreat. Since its creation in 1908, our citizens have relocated this funerary marker further and further from sites of civic life. The courthouse of 1770, Merchant Square, and Colonial Capitol are where we hold demonstrations, celebrate grand illumination, and hail the 4th of July. The funerary obelisk is not in the middle of a boulevard, is not on a height. It's in a hollow, nearly below street level. It does not recall the career of a Confederate dignitary. It's a memorial for the common dead. Mourning is what a funerary obelisk represents, and especially this one's inscription. On the south face of the base is a line, as has been noted, from Rudyard Kipling's poem Recessional: "Lord God of hosts, be with us yet, lest we forget, lest we forget." It's from an 1897 British hymn of sorrow for excessive pride, presumption, and the impending fall of an empire. Survivors of the South were making an admission of sorts that their cause was doomed to fail, but their dead kinfolk should at least be remembered. What's the fate of the Williamsburg obelisk? If it's discarded or stashed out of sight, it cannot become a site of mourning and repentance for a future generation. Perhaps the simplest change is truth in advertising. Rename this public space the Bicentennial Memorial Park. Factions may emerge who disapprove of the Galt family, American veterans of any era, or those who contracted HIV, but grieving is beyond politics, beyond any cause of the moment. Some decry the calculations that produced our nation's losses in Vietnam, but the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. should not be touched. Our funerary obelisk is mostly out of sight in a little visited enclave sheltering the dead. We have an opportunity to improve its symbolism in a more inclusive way. We should grieve our dead and grieve over their mistakes.
Mr. Greena, if you could wrap it up, please.
As part of our community's living memory. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Next, I have Robert Glasser. Welcome, sir.
Question of you before I start, because I'm a bit confused.
Well, sir, we don't have an exchange. This is an opportunity for you to make your statement. And so if you have 5 minutes.
Fine.
Thank you, sir.
This is personal to me. I don't know, I've listened to you people, and I wonder how many of you people are actually
And sir, if you can keep your comments
from
addressed to
Virginia
us.
or are come-heres. I'm a Virginian. My family has lived here over 2 centuries. My ancestors fought in Company C, 32nd Virginia, Williamsburg Junior Guards, and that monument down there honors their courage, sacrifice, and the honor they put toward their state. I mean, I've listened to the conversations about the War of Northern Aggression. I've listened to this man talk about how the Southerners were treasonous. Virginia voted to stay into the Union all the way up until the time Abraham Lincoln literally broke the rules of the Constitution and declared war on his own people. They would not send troops to Washington to invade their own countries. If you want to, I listened to this thing talked about as a war about slavery. If you wanted to talk about this being a war between two sides that didn't give a rat's patootie about the black race, I'll agree there. If you look at Lincoln's writings, he had no use for the black race. He said there was no way that the two could live together on equal political terms. Read his words. The Southerners, if this was about slavery, all they had to do was literally go along with Seward and Corbin's resolution that had already passed the House of Representatives and the Congress and vote in for the Corbin Amendment, which would have been the 13th Amendment of the Constitution, which legalized slavery and kept it in the South for as long as they wanted it. It was not about slavery. It never was. There were bigger issues. These two sides fought over it, and the South was invaded. The South is the only part of this country that's ever been invaded by another army. And we paid for it. Secession was legal. It still is. Abraham Lincoln, in his own words, in 1847, when he spoke about Texas's ability to secede from Mexico, quoted the Declaration of Independence and the words put down by our founding fathers and basically said, any people in any part of the country that are unhappy with their government have the perfect right to form another one to their liking. That's exactly what the South did. They voted to leave. They played by the rules. And they paid for it. North invaded us. They killed over 300,000 of us. They raped our women. They burned our cities. They destroyed the South and drove some of the most prosperous states into poverty, and they never got out of it until the 1920s and the 1930s. This was never about slavery. And when we get down to the point about these monuments, it's a stick in the eye. It's a crutch. It's the reason why certain people decide that they're getting a raw deal. You can destroy all these monuments. You can rewrite history. You can get on the side of genocide. Fine and dandy. It's our heritage now. It'll be yours later. You can take away every one of those monuments. You can destroy them all. Go 30 years from now, go back 30 years, and you have the same thing. Black people kill each other. What's the rate? 95% of all blacks killed in this country, and it's in the thousands every year, 95% are killed by their own people. Demonstrate about that. Illegitimacy, single-parent homes, poverty, school dropouts, national pastime. Demonstrate against that. It's not a monument's fault. You're in the business now of everybody walking over the South. It was the flag. It's us nasty Confederates. It's
Mr. Glasser,
the
if you can
monuments.
wrap it up, your time has expired.
It's a crutch. Leave the monument where it is. It honors decent and good men. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, I have Jeff Tolson.
Thank you. I'm Jeff Tolson, 193 Lewis Robert Lane, Williamsburg. Just wanted to talk about a couple of items in context. Between 1890 and 1920, there was a movement across the states that fought in the Civil War, both North and South, to remember what they had done. So it didn't matter if you lived in Mankato, Minnesota, or Williamsburg, Virginia. There was a movement to build monuments to honor the soldiers that fought in that war. It was sort of their way of healing from the worst war this country has ever gone through. There's more than 1,000 in some of these monuments in the South. There's more than 1,000 in some of these monuments in the North. They're all simply put up, as this one is, to honor the citizens of their county that served in that conflict. In the case of Williamsburg and James City County, it's basically the men who served in the Williamsburg Junior Guard of the 32nd Virginia Infantry, the James City Cavalry of the 5th Virginia Cavalry, and the James City Artillery, as well as a variety of other men that served in the Navy and served on various staff and other unit positions. If we look at a little bit of the history of the monument, and a couple of people have talked about this, but they left out one of the moves. The monument has been in 5 locations. It started out in Palace Green. Then when Williamsburg acquired that property, it moved for a little over a year to Cedar Grove Cemetery. And then in 1932, when the courthouse was built, it was requested that it move to the courthouse. Now, most of these monuments that I was just talking about, north and south, reside in the majority on courthouse properties because they're honoring the people of that county and community that served in the war. So it moved from Cedar Grove back to the courthouse, then to the new courthouse, and then, as we've already discussed, to Bicentennial Park. And that is simply the history of what the monument is about and why it is where it is. I personally, who had ancestors who served in both the Confederacy and in the Union, appreciate all of these monuments, and I think they should be preserved because they honor the citizens. As one of these gentlemen said, it is a memorial to the folks of this area who served and, of course, who now are all deceased. If I had my choice, I would say leave the memorial where it is. If you want to contextualize it, some gentlemen suggested on the blank side. I think that might be okay. Or put a little something beside it to tell the history of what it is and why it is. My second choice would be to take it back where it was on move number 2, which was not mentioned, to Cedar Grove Cemetery. I think it was a lady mentioned, perhaps Bruton Parish, but Cedar Grove to me is a little better because the largest amount of dead who served are at Cedar Grove Cemetery of any spot in James City County or Williamsburg. And my third choice, if we have to have a third choice, would be whatever choice the United Daughters of the Confederacy might be able to come up with, but I thank you for your time and for your consideration.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Next, I have Dennis Cotner. Welcome, sir. You're welcome. Name and address for the record, please.
I'm Dennis Cotner. I reside at 127 Wilson Circle, Williamsburg, Virginia. I remember a story of a young boy who had just come out of a church service when the minister caught him staring up at a large inscribed plaque on the wall of the vestibule. The curious boy asked the minister what it was, and he replied, "Why, Johnny, Those are the names of men who died in the service. The little boy stood there for a second and asked, "Really? Which one, the 9:30 or the 11 o'clock?" Now, I know it's a humorous story, but it shows how we sometimes can misinterpret what we see out there in the world around us. I believe it is so with memorials to Confederate soldiers, and in particular, the one that we have here in Williamsburg. There are those who would attach to it a meaning of supremacy and a reminder of slavery days, or glorifying the Confederacy, or a monument to traitors. There are those who see it as a thank you to those soldiers and sailors that should not be forgotten, who were called by their community to defend their homes and family from invasion. Many are indifferent to it altogether. I remember as a young man seeing my first such memorial. It was on the courthouse square, and a large caliber cannon sat prominently in the middle. A stone memorial was behind the gun, and it said something to the effect of, "Dedicated to our county's young men who sacrificed in the war, 1861-1865, and had crossed flags on it. On the back it said, 'Lest we forget.' And I thought, forget what? What was this war about, and what did this word 'lest' mean? Well, after many years of studying American history, I saw many of these monuments with almost identical wording. Having made the Civil War my period of major interest in the study of our history, I found out the answers to many a question concerning those 4 years, and still find more questions out there needing answers. Memorials, statues, and monuments are just one way of sparking interest in our shared history. All material culture and physical spaces and structures should be kept as reminders of us, Americans all. In my experience, if you see evil in any memorial or monument to Americans or our country's deeds, you misread who they were. Now, better than 60 years have passed since I saw that first monument, and I've been involved in all aspects of Civil War history and a long career at Colonial Williamsburg. Never in all those years have I seen any memorial, monument, or statue inscribed with anything hateful or alluding to supremacy. You see, that first monument was a Union memorial in my Indiana hometown, and I found out early what the word "lest" meant. Since then, I've seen many courthouse monuments, north and south, resemble each other very closely. None talk of hate. This monument in Williamsburg is dedicated to the soldiers and sailors who served at the behest of this community. That is all it is. It was put up in a prominent place in towns, as are all monuments, dedications, plaques, and statues from all eras. Ours was moved 3 times, and now we are seeing renewed calls for it to be removed a 4th time. The riotous behavior that has unfortunately taken hold of our country have targeted a lot of Confederate monuments. It is extremely unfortunate, as the trigger that has set this off had nothing to do with these monuments. The excuse is contrived. Communities around the southern states have been browbeat into removing Confederate statues and memorials that, quote, are offensive. The vandalism of statues and monuments haven't stopped because they are associated with the Confederacy. They have now moved on to Columbus, Lincoln, religious statues, and the like. It is unfortunate that there are those who would destroy but not build up. Would we remove Lord Botetourt's statue in front of the Wren Building because he was a representative of oppressive British rule? Or should he stay there because of the goodness that he showed Virginians? All you learn by tearing down is destruction. The memorial in Bicentennial Park should stay. It's been moved enough and should stay the property of the county. Hiding remnants of our past in any fashion in any free society gets us nothing but ignorance. The men for whom this memorial was dedicated saw it as a duty to defend their homes and family. Would any of us do differently? Keep it where it is, please. Do not give up into vandalism and threats. We are a better people than that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cotner. Next I have Lovely Weeks. Host, maybe? Host? I know the feeling. Thank you for your patience.
I'm Lewis Weeks. We live on Palisades in Port Anne. And I'm a recovering preacher. And I want to say something very personal. Others have spoken personally as well. I grew up in Greenville, Mississippi, and Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis is the farthest point north in Mississippi. And I grew up as a very normal white evangelical male, Protestant. And I didn't realize what people who are black and people who are of other colors had to put up with in this world until I got to college and then to seminary. And I visited, we were missionaries in Congo. And the Congolese, joyful, poor, all had different, very different ideas about community and life than the folk I knew, who were mostly white and mostly Southern. When I got to seminary and was working with African American and Spanish-speaking people, we visited Ghana, and we went to Elmina Prison. That's the place that was the embarking place for the slaves who were then brought to America and to Caribbean and to other parts of the West. And I thought it was awful. But I went on and ate lunch, but an African American woman who was with me completely broke her down. She couldn't do anything for 2 days. She had seen where her ancestors were and what happened to them. And I've realized since that time, and reading, several folk have mentioned some of the signal books. Toni Morrison comes to mind. Katie Cannon was a colleague of mine at Union Seminary. And reading them and listening to them, I've really undergone a religious conversion. And I invite every white person in America to engage in that conversion. Because what we do is take our whiteness for granted and consider that everybody's like us. And everybody's not like us. And the combined power of different colors and different people and different backgrounds mean that we have a real chance to be stronger, more inclusive, and more vital. By the way, I'm a son of my maternal grandmother. Her grandfather was Captain William Hunt in the Confederate forces in Mississippi. And we claim kin to John Mosby, the Gray Ghost, who is important here in Virginia. And so this conversion perhaps has been particularly strong for me, but it's a conversion that so many of us still need to go through. And I'm just beginning. Thank you. I want this removed.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Next, I have Mr. Bob Singley. Welcome, sir.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, my office is across the street at 423 North Boundary Street. I appreciate you affording me the opportunity to speak today. I wish to preface my comments regarding the disposition of the Confederate monument in Bicentennial Park by the following points. I come from a family in which the males served in the military from the Revolutionary War to the Vietnam era. My great-great-grandfather served in the Continental Army and fought against the British. My great-great-grandfather, Isaiah Starr, and his brother Jeremiah Starr, served in the Union Army from the First Battle of Bull Run to the Siege of Petersburg. I have numerous letters they sent home during the course of the war describing the hardships and the battles they fought in. I've never been a resident of the city of Williamsburg, but was raised in James City County, and as some of the members here in the audience, attended Matthew Whaley High School, or Matthew Whaley, and James Blair High School. And because of the monument recognizes both the citizens of James City County and Williamsburg, I'm speaking to you today. While my formal education is in engineering and business, I have a love of history which was instilled in me by 3 teachers at James Blair High School: Dan Landis, Ray Freed, and Bill Kelso. Dan taught history and encouraged us to analyze it from different perspectives and how one could learn from history to make better decisions in the future. Ray Freed taught us government, which encompassed, amongst other subjects, the three branches of government, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. He stressed the importance of free speech, which is guaranteed to all under the First Amendment of the Constitution. He encouraged us to debate amongst ourselves and be respectful of other points of view. Unfortunately, today, there are those that force their opinions on others through intimidation and acts of vandalism. Tearing down statues or defacing them with paint or harassing patrons of restaurants on the Duke of Gloucester Street by shouting through a bullhorn while they are dining under the guise of free speech is not acceptable. These acts lack civility and are divisive. Bill Kelso was an archaeologist and taught us history as well and how we could transition the events of the past to the present. He would eventually go on to discover the fort at Jamestown. The Confederate monument in Bicentennial Park is an unobtrusive design. It is an obelisk which memorialized those who died. In the Virginia Gazette edition, dated May 9, 1908, there is an article detailing the unveiling of the monument. It cites a number of old families from Williamsburg and James City County who were in attendance: the Coles, the Garretts, the Halls, the Tylers, the Warburtons. Many of their descendants live amongst us today. It honors the sacrifice these men made during the war for a cause that they strongly believed in, and to protect their families, neighbors, and native state. The current narrative you hear on the evening news from some politicians is that these soldiers and sailors, along with their generals, were traitors. They were not. They were faced with the hard decision: either support the Union and fight against their own brothers, or support the Confederacy. Many of them were like General Robert E. Lee, who opposed secession but could not bear to take arms against his native state. A day after the Virginia seceded from the Union, General Winfield Scott, who was the commander of the U.S. Army, offered Lee the command of the Army. 2 days later, in a heartfelt letter to General Scott, after 25 years of service to the Union, Lee resigned his commission, in which he spoke of his admiration of Scott and his service, but closed with the following comments: "Save the defense of my native state, I never desire again to draw my sword." The revisionists today would have us rewrite history, censor it, or erase it. We need to study history, both the good and the bad, analyze it, debate it, while being civil with each other and learn from it. This will ensure we become better people, better citizens, and a better country through inclusion of diverse opinions and cultures versus identity politics. We are all Americans. Rather than removing the monument in Bicentennial Park,
Mr. Singley, if you can wrap up.
okay, well, rather than removing the monument in Bicentennial Park and relegating it to the museum and the warehouse where it will be hidden from the general public as proposed by the sample motion of today's agenda, I recommend it remain in its current location. I also recommend the City Council establish a commission to erect a monument in Bicentennial Park, honoring their slaves and their descendants.
Thank you. Mr. Singley, I've got to be fair to everybody.
Okay, thank you.
At your time. Thank you. Next, I have B.C. Carr. Could Mr. Carr be in the next room?
He'll be right here.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you come up. Thank you.
Thank you for giving me a chance to talk. My name is Baxter Carr. I'm from Forest, Virginia, and you all don't know where that is. It's about 3.5 hours west of here on the other side of Lynchburg. So you probably ask yourself, why are you here? Well, I was born here. And with a little bit of luck, Bill Brown will put me in the ground over there at Cedar Grove one day. I've got a spot over there. But being here in Williamsburg, my early years, there has been a lot of change. Everybody knows that. There's not anybody in here that doesn't know that. Mrs. Howell, my 5th grade teacher at Matthew Whaley, she used to give me envelopes during the day. I'd get on my bicycle and ride them over to Peninsula Bank and Trust to deposit them for her. Now, that probably wouldn't happen in today's world, would it? I was on a recent trip up through New England on Route 1 up north of Kennebunkport, Maine. There's a statue I pulled over on the side of the road. It was your traditional Civil War soldier standing on top of a pedestal. A guy with a rifle and a knapsack. Engraved on there were the lives that had been lost with that war and other wars. And at that moment, I decided and figured out that if you win, nobody's complaining about your statues. There weren't any words painted. Nobody was picketing. You know, if we're going to do away with some history, why don't we do away with it all, up north and down south here as well? I've heard a lot of people and a lot of emotion talking today, and I respect each and every one of them because everybody's got something to say, and I appreciate the time that you all give everybody here. My connection to the Civil War here in Williamsburg is I had 2 relatives, 2 of my great-great-grandfathers fought here in May of 1862. Neither one of them had anything. Neither one of them owned anybody. Neither one of them had money. They got one of them, they both enlisted in their service. But what's interesting about my background in that is they were from different places in this country. One was with the Philadelphia Volunteers as a 2nd lieutenant. Another one was a private with the 61st Infantry, Isle of Wight County Avengers. That monument over there has been around for a long time. It represents a battle that was fought here a long time ago. My great-great-grandfather was from Isle of Wight County, was 30 years old when he enlisted. His wife was pregnant. He didn't probably know why he was even fighting, other than the fact that his state called upon him to represent himself in combat against another force. I hope that your decision on that particular memorial, I'm sure both of those gentlemen lost friends in that battle. And I'd like to see it remain where it is. If there's an alternate location you're looking for, I'd be proud to have it back over in Cedar Grove, not far from where my final resting place is. And again, thank you very much for your time, and thanks for the opinions of all the people that were here today.
Thank you.
So that concludes all the comment cards that I have. But if there's anybody in the audience who would like to come forward and speak, yes, ma'am. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Council. I am Jerry Waring. I am from Saluda, and you're wondering, why am I here? Of course, that's an hour away. But I come down to attend the UDC meetings here in Williamsburg, and I just want to say a couple of comments. I've heard all kinds of opinions today. Some I agree with, but there are always 2 sides to a story. And I think it's very fitting to quote from the Commonwealth's attorney who spoke when the monument was relocated to Cedar Grove Cemetery. And this was in the 1930s. Quote, "The soldiers were not fighting a war of aggression, but fought in defense of ideals and principles, without which any nation is lost." And I invite you to think about where our country is today. There are 2 sides to every question, but perhaps we can all agree that most of our country's history is good. Some not so good, but it is nevertheless history. And we feel a responsibility to not erase the memory of the soldiers and sailors of the Battle of Williamsburg and surrounding areas. So I ask that you consider both sides. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, sir, please. Welcome, sir. State your name and address, please, for the record.
My name is Corwin Hammond. I live at 500 Queensbury Lane here in Williamsburg, Virginia. And my initial plan was to sit this dance out. But then I heard a couple of people comment that we need to hear from our African American community. We're tired. We're tired. I want to read something to you that it says the new Constitution has put at rest forever all the agitating questions relating to our peculiar institution, African American slavery, as it exists among us. Our new government is founded upon exactly the opposite ideas. Its foundations are laid, its cornerstones rest upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and normal condition. This is quoted from the Cornerstone speech that was given by the Confederate Vice President Alexander H. Stephens in Savannah, Georgia on March 21st, 1861. So for those who would say that the Confederate War was not about slavery are misinformed. Their vice president specifically said that their new Constitution was founded on the fact of the Negro being inferior. In 1969, my grandmother, who was born in the late 1800s, took me to downtown Louisville to show me a statue. It was a Confederate monument. And her words to me were, those things were erected to intimidate us, to always remind us that we need to stay in our place. These current condition of our country is a constant reminder. To the African American, everything Confederate is a reminder of a painful past. Every statue, every monument reminds us of abuse, of being beaten. A gentleman mentioned during the war that their women were raped. How ironic. So were ours. But we could not fight, or we would be lynched. There is a book called Without Sanctuary that I recommend all of you look at. It is a book that deals with the lynching history of the African American in the United States. A history that the lynchings were celebrated. Hence we have the word picnic. These monuments, in my opinion, should be cast in the bottom of the sea, where many of my ancestors died, trying to make it to this country to be enslaved. Many of those who spoke today, they have the privilege of tracing their ancestry. They can say, my great-great-grandfather came here from Ireland. My great-great-grandfather was this. My great-great-grandfather was that. I don't have that privilege. I know that my great-great-great-grandfather was a slave in Alabama. I know that my family was ripped apart in Alabama. I had to depend on DNA to even suggest to me that I might be from Cameroon. That could be inaccurate. These monuments and this history is painful. It's painful to get up every morning and be reminded that you live in a country that really does not regard you as human. These monuments need to go. If the United States wants to deal with its history, Deal with your real history. Deal with your atrocities. Deal with how you have treated the black people in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hammond. Is there anybody else in the public that'd like to come forward? Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am, please. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for holding this meeting.
State your name for the record, please, and your address.
Yes, my name is Antonia from 114 Corvette Lane. I experienced my first act of racism right here in Williamsburg. I was at Claire Baker Elementary School, and it was Black History Month. And my teacher, I became very emotional because my black family and my black neighborhood was able to shelter me from a lot of the atrocities and a lot of our history. But I began to become upset, and I went into the bathroom at that school, and my teacher came in after me, and she was wiping my tears, and she said, "I don't understand why you're so upset. It happened so long ago." And she implored me to forget. She wanted me to forget that slavery had harmed my family so much, as the gentleman before me spoke about. Every time I see a Confederate flag, I know that I am not welcome. If I see a bar and I see a Confederate flag outside, I know I'm not going to go in there. If my neighbor at the end of the cul-de-sac has his flag flying outside, I know that I'm not going to send my kid there to try and send him to raise any money for school. Excuse me, my glasses fog up. But that statue, that symbol does carry pain. And every time I see that, I know that it is not for me. I know that I am not welcome. There are no black daughters of the Confederacy. They're all white. And why do you think so? It's not for me. And I'll finish right there. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody in this room that would like to come forward? Seeing none, new. If there's time, maybe we'll come back. We're going to shift to the other room. Going to be a little bit of delay for technology, but first I have Jack Van Horn. Hopefully this works out. Mr. Trivett, before you, I was going to suggest, I don't know how many are over there, but since some people are leaving here, perhaps they can all come over now, or the appropriate amount. I appreciate everyone's patience. We're trying to figure out a way to accommodate everybody, and sometimes technology gets in the way. I presume you're Mr. Van Horn?
Yes.
Okay, just give me 1 second, we'll get people settled in.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for your patience and understanding.
I'm Jack Van Horn, and I live at 200 Governor's Drive. And, oh, I've got a timer in front of me. Oh. I will go as quickly as I can. We've heard so many different comments today, and some of them are just appalling. There was one gentleman who talked about all the men of Williamsburg, James City County went to fight. There were a lot of black people in Williamsburg at that time. He forgot them. He never once mentioned that this is a memorial for the suppression and slavery of black people. And I went to college in Ohio, not in the South. I'm going to talk about this as a little personal thing. For 3 years, there were 3 of us renting an attic area off campus. 2 of them were black. A young man from Newport News. The other one was from Baltimore. And I could see their oppression ideas. The Newport News guy said, "Thank God I don't have to go to college in Virginia." And there were many times when they would talk about their life as a black person in America. It was quite depressing. Remember, I got to know these guys for 3 years as roommates. One time, 3 of us invited him, one of the guys, to go out for an evening. We went down to Columbus, Ohio, went into this restaurant, sat down. The manager came over and said, "Please, we have to ask you to leave. We have a couple of guests here who don't want to dine with black people." This is in the North. I can't imagine what their life was like here in Virginia. Now, I came to Virginia to teach at William and Mary in 1970. My wife and I needed a place to stay, obviously. Real estate agent took us around the area. We took us past the high school. My wife was going to be a high school teacher, and showed her the high school. And down the road, we passed another building, and it said high school on it. He said, "Well, how come we have 2 high schools so close together?" And he said, "Oh, that was the high school for the coloreds until they abolished freedom of choice." I'm just telling you this as a background. We've heard plenty about the history. This memorial is an offense to the vast, vast numbers of people that are still being oppressed today. Please don't let it continue. And for God's sakes, don't spend a cent of the city money to transport it to the people who would continue the racism. I think I'm going to quit there. I'm just so incensed about some of the things I've heard today. People totally unaware that this country is in trouble with its racism. Today, I've heard too many people saying that out loud and proud of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Next, I have Allison Kennington.
Hello. Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council members. My name is Allison Kennington, and I live in the Sterling Manor Apartments in Williamsburg. I first came here in 2009 for college, and I actually moved to Japan for a few years, and I came back here because I felt like this embodied the best parts of the United States that I had experienced. I'm currently active in local politics and in other community clubs and organizations that I haven't really been anywhere else. And I'm speaking today in the interest of preserving and expanding the acceptance and comfort I found in my chosen hometown. This monument should be removed as soon as possible and covered immediately and remain covered until its removal. There is no reason it should remain here any longer than necessary, and no reason it should remain visible to Williamsburg's residents and visitors for even another day. Not only is this monument out of step with the values and residents of Williamsburg and the students at the College of William and Mary, it is a source of shame and hypocrisy for colonial Williamsburg, which prides itself on embodying the most noble aspects of our nation's history. We don't get to sell books and merchandise of Alexander Hamilton to capitalize on the popularity of Lin-Manuel Miranda's hit musical about freedom and equality and then turn away when history has its eyes on us. We can't simply celebrate equality and freedom while glorifying the Confederacy and keeping remnants of the Lost Cause movement, which, as others have stated, are not only reminders of a time when Black people were considered unequal to whites, but are undeniable statements that there are still people alive today who consider that to be true. I do not believe that the city should give the monument back to the Daughters of the Confederacy, as they have given no indication that they wish to properly contextualize this monument. However, if the city decides to do so, then I would request that we only return it on the condition that they pay for the removal in its entirety without our help, and that they agree not to display it publicly. I had planned for that to be all that I wanted to say, but some of those who spoke earlier have forced me to respond. There are those who have said that this monument was small and insignificant, but I noticed that only white people attempted to downplay this significance, because only white people have the luxury of thinking that because a monument is small or less visible, that its symbolism changes or it no longer matters. The monument's lackluster design and its plain surroundings do not change its meaning. They simply make it less effective at communicating its undeniably reprehensible and un-American message. While I understand that the fact that it exists as a memorial in a memorial space, I do not think that any memorial should celebrate the alleged heroism or sacrifice of those who died attempting to destroy our nation. We do not celebrate the German war dead from World War I or World War II, not even common soldiers or ones who have descendants living in our country, because we don't celebrate the enemies of our nations who killed our soldiers. I've heard some here say that the Civil War was not about slavery, but if there's some question on that, I advise that the council should speak to any of William and Mary's many qualified professors, as the college boasts one of the finest programs on American history in our country, and they will tell you that slavery was very much the primary cause of the Civil War. So I implore you to listen to the members of our community, particularly the Black voices, and those who have come here to let you know what racism in Williamsburg has done to them. Thank you so much for your time, and I trust that you will make the only right decision in this case.
Thank you, ma'am. David Tritchler. Welcome, sir.
Hey, Pat and Caleb, welcome to City Council. We're big shoes to fill with Benny and Paul, but we're very glad to have you, and thank you for this opportunity. Well, I think it's clear that we should acknowledge that the architectural landscape we've inherited is neither sacred nor unchanging. The time and the proliferation of the monuments themselves illustrates this point. In the immediate years following the Civil War, Confederates and their families obviously mourned their dead, but they did not erect monuments. Only 30 memorials over a 25-year period. It was only during the Jim Crow era in which its proliferation exploded. Hundreds and hundreds of monuments during the time of white supremacy and the South imposition of Jim Crow. Removing Confederate monuments is not historical erasure. We extended this same logic we could use to justify maintaining after 1964 signs that identified Negro water fountains or colored waiting rooms and other markers of Southern segregation to preserve that historical moment. And in fact, if true history would be represented, we look to monuments to Union soldiers and enslaved who fought to preserve this Constitution, not public tributes to those who fought to destroy it. The Confederacy fought to maintain slavery and white supremacy in the United States. That is not something our country should honor or commemorate in any way, particularly on public ground dedicated to all citizens of a body. These men fought to destroy the Constitution of the United States or the right to own another human being, and this monument glorifies that inhumane purpose. They might not have meant or known what they fought for at that time, but we know now what they fought for. Because succeeding states literally spelled out slavery as a reason for leaving in their documents. South Carolina, the first state to succeed from the Union, said in its official statement, it saw any attempts to abolish slavery and grant rights to Black Americans as hostile to the South and destructive of its beliefs and safety. A letter encouraging Texas to succeed, Louisiana Commissioner George Williamson was even more explicit. He argued the Confederacy was needed to preserve the blessings of African slavery, and the Confederate states were bound together by the same necessity and determination to preserve African slavery. This is the cause for which the Confederacy fought. In fact, Confederate symbolism reemerged in U.S. culture to support white supremacist movements. The United Daughters Confederacy did daily work to sustain racial segregation and shape resistance to racial equality. Among their track record and their approaches includes publishing pro-KK books for children, which accuse blacks of laziness, for identifying their laziness, refusing to work for their gracious slave owners, and praising the methods KK used to terrify blacks, including hanging nooses around town. This was authorized books by the United Daughters Confederacy put into our public school system. They also wrote improved history books to perpetuate the lost cause myth. And it's remarkable to me when we think about the tension on the Confederacy, just what's lasted longer if we think about the timeline. Fast and Furious franchise is twice as long as the Confederacy existed. Frasier, almost 3 times as long. NSYNC, a popular boy band of my youth, lasted longer than the Confederacy. Doritos Locos Tacos are going twice as strong as the Confederacy. But the inhumane ideas of the Confederacy is what's been perpetuated and still exists, that whites are better than blacks, that public governments can create symbols and place them in public places to remind blacks that whites are better than they and live on and endure. And while a monument is a symbol, and as many people point out today, that doesn't help address many of the underlying issues. Symbols are important. We know this. We have symbols in each of our daily activities and lives. And the symbol is what our community supports. I think that's why this vote is so important. Initially, I came in thinking that even the use of public taxpayer dollars to remove the monument would be unconscionable. But I think just hearing the pain that this has caused to many members, it may be a small price to pay for us to help us repair and move on. Because I'm struck by one of my favorite scriptures from the Old Testament. This is Isaiah talking about a moment of need and pain of the community. He says, "Is this not the fast I have chosen, to loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke?" And he says, if you do this, this is the promise. And this is the promise that we can have as a community. "And they that shall be of thee shall build the old waste places. Thou shalt raise up the foundations of many generations. And thou shalt be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to dwell in." Again, I think for many people who fought in the Civil War, they may have not known the common soldiers. The leaders, yes. Many of the common soldiers did not. But we do. And today this vote is about us and what we represent and where we choose to place our values. I say you support the staff recommendation and take this step to repair the breach and restore the path for us and future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tritchell. Next, I have Vanetta Robinson.
Mayor, I believe Ms. Robinson decided not to speak.
Oh. Get it over. Thank you, sir. Welcome, ma'am.
My name is Vanetta Robinson, and I'm a native of Williamsburg. I relocated back to Williamsburg after spending 22 years in New York. And I don't want to be repetitious because everyone has stated most of the things that I share. And I just want to say that it's very difficult to listen and to hear some of the comments coming from a few people, because it's disturbing that the mindset that I heard years ago growing up here in Williamsburg through segregation, that I'm still hearing the same types of comments. And I really have an issue with the fact that some think that it's a memorial. I don't believe it's a memorial unto their ancestors. And I'd like to say that I share the same sentiments of the people who stated that it's a sign of intimidation and a reminder of white supremacy that says, without saying, by the statutes, that you are still an inferior race. And that really, really bothers me, because we've come a long way in this country, but we have a long way to go. And in my estimation, these type of symbols should be put into museums. We're not trying to erase history. history has been written. And luckily for some, not our generation, I'll never know my true history because I can't trace back to my foreparents as they came over here, enslaved in ships, and even changed our names where we wouldn't know what tribe or where to go back to if we tried to have our histories of who our forefathers were. So I thank you very much for your time, and I hope you make the right decisions.
Thank you, ma'am. Next, I have Lori Wheel. Welcome, ma'am.
So, 412 Harriet Tubman Drive. Bear with me, I felt a lot braver in the other room. Okay, excuse me, I'm going to fix the clock. So, folks, I came here for two things today, to make 2 points. I came here to be on the record for my position about whether to remove or to keep the statue. But after listening to the amazing speakers today, I'm not going to do that. I've just heard so many heartfelt, relevant reasonings. I've learned so much about Williamsburg and the statue. There is no right or wrong answer to me. Sorry to disappoint anyone. But I think and the second reason I came was to ask you, please be sure that the decision, this momentous decision to be made, really needs to be subjective, anonymous, if possible. It's so serious. I mean, it's so serious to everyone that I've heard speak today, and it's very important. I noticed there's a member missing here. So is a score being kept? I mean, how could it not be subjective, what you're hearing and feeling and thinking? And so that's what concerns me now, not which way the decision goes. It is how it is decided. I mean, I'm even imagining sitting in that room something like a referendum in November. I don't know. That's what I need to ask you. And that's what I suggest, is this be as objective, fair, and a vote, an anonymous vote, is the only way I can imagine. And if I were sitting where you are, I would want it to be that way. I would not want anyone of the wonderful people who've spoken today to say, they decided against me. That would really, really hurt. This is a momentous occasion and event, as well it should be. And I am so proud of Williamsburg for doing this. I don't know if you had any choice, but it's been long and arduous, and I'm just really, really moved by this, to the point that I had an idea, I had a feeling when I came in, that first reason I came, and it doesn't seem relevant after listening to so much heartfelt feelings. Feelings, subjective, right? That's the thing. So how is it going to be objective, the decision? It can't be. But it can be fair. And it can make me feel better if the decision does go against me, if I feel like it was an objective, and the city of Williamsburg really had a chance to vote on this, I guess. It's just all I can keep coming back to. But anyway, so I do not envy you. This is not going to be easy unless you can make it really objective. So I want to thank everyone who spoke. I'm really happy to have been here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wheel. Now I have Elamara Adelu. State your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, my name is Elmira Adili, and it's okay, everyone gets it wrong, especially written on paper.
Thank you.
I live at 614 York Street, apartment 227. Okay, I'm gonna start my time now. Do I press play here?
No, it'll do its own thing.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
I am a Texan and a senior at William & Mary. I wanted to speak for many William & Mary students who aren't able to be here today. This monument is an offense both to the American Union and to every black person that comes to a public park and sees it. There is a reason that Colonial Williamsburg had it moved. I have seen this monument with my own eyes. It holds 2 Confederate flags on it. In my view, and in the view of many fellow students, the flag alone signifies a glorification of the Confederacy, which, as many people have already emphasized, was a seceded, treacherous pseudo-nation that clearly valued white lives more than black lives, that actively wanted to subjugate black lives, who explicitly said that this war was over slavery. I hope that we can understand that while the individuals that fought in the Confederacy are not as blameworthy as the wealthy plantation owners that forced this war, that the monument still glorifies the Confederacy. To memorialize these individuals, I recommend a completely different statute that doesn't involve any Confederate symbols or explicitly says that these individuals fought for a cause that was immoral. We can look to Germany as an example of how a country can heal. There are no monuments for Nazi soldiers in Germany. There are monuments for lives lost, and if they are there, they are done in such a way that clearly recognize the fault of the Nazi Party and do not publicly display swastikas. I hope that you can prioritize the black voices that have told you time and time again to remove this monument. If you have paid any attention, you've seen that the black people who have spoken here today have asked you to remove it. I would like to emphasize that the best course of action is to destroy it, send it to the harbor if you wish, or reuse the marble for something else. But at the very least, you should give it to a museum to really recontextualize it. A museum is probably the only location that can actually contextualize this properly, that has the resources to properly contextualize it. If you choose to give it to the United Daughters of the Confederacy, I implore you to make them pay for it. Do not make us pay for their private use of this monument. I also hope that you will make them promise not to display it where it's publicly viewable. It's already an offense for many black individuals to have to see the Confederate flag flown in front of private properties. It would be horrible if this monument gets to be moved, but then is moved somewhere where when you're driving on the highway, you are forced to see this kind of offense. I'd like to thank everyone who got to speak today. I know that it's important to take into consideration everyone's views, and as the woman stated before me, I hope that you can be objective and democratic in this decision. And I hope that you understand that this is something that really deeply impacts black individuals, that no monument to Confederate individuals cannot be a glorification of such a war and cannot be an offense to such individuals. So thank you again for letting me speak, and I hope you make the right decision.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. So that wraps up my speaker's cards. Is there anybody in the audience that hasn't had the opportunity to speak? Please come forward, state your name and address for the record.
Max Blaylock, 2772 Linden Lane in York County, so right here in Williamsburg. I apologize for my casual dress. I wasn't planning on coming, but I was watching online and listening to everyone and decided to come share my 2 cents as well. I'm a native of Alabama. I've been here in Williamsburg for 10 years. I also happen to be, as my t-shirt is signifying, the United Methodist campus minister appointed to the College of William & Mary. Sorry, I'm supposed to look at y'all. And one of the central teachings of my faith, and really of all faiths, because Jesus got it from the Hebrew Scriptures, of course, because he was Jewish, is to love your neighbor as yourself. And I think what we have heard from our African American friends and neighbors here is what should be paramount. And the one thing that I want to point out is that once again, our African American friends and neighbors are coming before a group of white officials and asking for justice, and asking for tearing down a monument that was established simply to enforce Jim Crow and to terrorize individuals and to remind the black citizens of this community that when it's put in front of the courthouse and repeatedly put in front of the courthouse, to remind citizens of this community the kind of justice that they would get in this community, that they remain second-class citizens. That was the purpose of this monument. That was the purpose of so many monuments that have been erected throughout our community. So when it's time to make this decision, I encourage you to follow the teachings of Jesus, to follow the Hebrew Scriptures, and of so many faiths, and even if you're not of any faith, to say, who should we listen to the most? It's not folks that look like me. It's our African-American brothers and sisters out here who are telling us exactly what that monument is, exactly what it means, and what it has always meant to them. So please, listen to them and do what is right. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Has everybody had a chance to speak that wants to speak? Okay, seeing no more new comment speakers, I'm going to close the open hearing. And with that, I'll turn to my colleagues for comments or thoughts.
So first of all, I'd like to thank everyone who's taken the time and come to address us here today, address City Council. But even prior to this, there's been numerous emails and phone calls and contact with citizens in the community. So as a City Council, we couldn't ask for any more than to have your input on a decision such as this. I'm, as one of the ladies stated here recently, I respect everybody's opinion, and not that people just came to the table saying either remove the monument or leave the monument, but they did research, or they had passion, or they had pain to share with City Council. And it's not only here today in a public forum, but also with citizens that we've spoken to on the phone and spoken to in person. So again, that's meaningful as we contemplate the decision. As we know, regardless of the decision that's made, whether the monument stays or it's moved, not everyone's going to agree with that decision. But the task before me as a City Council member that I took very seriously, and I know council colleagues do as well, is some of the many things that have been mentioned today that we have to consider. You know, is a public park the appropriate place for the monument? Does it erase history? Does it embody our values? Is it painful to citizens? So we have to weigh all of that, as at least I do. I weigh all of that as I make a decision. And with that, at the end of the day, it's what I think is the best decision for our community. And again, sometimes everyone's not gonna agree with that. I've also seen in other localities where they say that disturbing these monuments creates more divisiveness. I disagree. I think it's a step in eliminating divisiveness. So for the council to take up this issue, I think it's a step in the right direction. And also, I think that somebody shared an excerpt from a letter that we received that said, you know, this is just a small step. There's more uncomfortable conversations that need to take place for everyone in the community to feel equal. So after weighing all of those options, the comments here today, I'm in favor of us moving the monument.
So, is Mr. Maslin with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Can hear
Yes.
you. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. As we have heard from one speaker, it is helpful to listen to Robert E. Lee's views on Civil War monuments. 150 years ago, as president of a college in Lexington, Virginia, Robert E. Lee feared that these reminders of the past would preserve fierce passions for the future. Such emotions threatened his vision for a speedy reconciliation. As he saw it, bridging a divided country justified bridging history and places. And I agree with the comments of the Vice Mayor. Thank you.
Ramsey.
And overall, I agree with the comments that Vice Mayor Dent made as far as learning a lot from the speakers that we have here. And one thing that I would like to commend all the speakers on today is a word we don't often hear in today's rhetoric is civility. I really appreciate people speaking their opinions and having confidence that they are able to speak freely what they feel on this matter, and that in doing so they have respect for other speakers and continue to be courteous and polite to the different viewpoints that have been presented. One thing I would like to point out as far as when we talk about the cost, once the decision is made, if it is to remove the monument, there is a cost associated with that. So I think that and the city would need to contribute and be part of that cost, whether it go to if we abandon our claim and it goes to the UDC, or if we just take it down. So there's always going to be some material cost to get rid of it. And so for the reasons that we have and appreciating the staff's recommendation, I'm in favor of supporting that.
Rogers.
Thank you. I've thought a lot about how I will vote today, which is immensely helped by you all who gave comment, and of course the emails and calls that we've gotten before this. I think addressing this monument is an incredibly honest thing the city can do, as it's a reckoning with what our values are. So in the spirit of honesty, I am speaking as someone who also, as other speakers have said today, has direct ancestors who fought for the Confederacy, and one who was also born in the South, in Alabama, of all places. And if you'll bear with me just for a moment, I have one point to make, and then I would vote to remove the statue. The fact of the matter is, of course, we would not be here today if not for the statue's dedication in 1908, which means for me the question to address is, why was that statue and others like it originally given? And I think that it's strange that it was given not during the period of Reconstruction, but instead some 40 plus years after the Civil War ended, with other statues that were popping up around the Commonwealth and around the South. And this, in accordance with the Jim Crow laws of the day, speak towards how I see the statue, and that it does not hold the same values that we should in the city of Williamsburg. And in fact, it came right after the state of Virginia passed a new constitution which, as Jim Crow laws enacted around the South, established things like poll taxes, like segregating schools, like literacy tests, which were directly targeting black men and women. And if the monument and others like it were created around the courthouse and government buildings, then I cannot adequately think that it has a place to remain in Williamsburg, even if it is still in Bicentennial Park, one of our smaller parks. It does not at all in line with some of our values, two of which being beauty of our natural vistas and involvement of all citizens in local government. An important point that's been made today is that what we decide today is not the end-all be-all of this discussion, but it's an important first step to make, a performative one, but a very important one to make. So as a former history student at William & Mary, as a Southerner, as someone who, for better or worse, has the Confederacy in his family tree, the statue is not a point of pride to me. I don't think it should be for our city, and I will plan to vote for its removal. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, first, I'd like to just commend everybody. At the beginning of the meeting, I had asked that we participate in a civil dialogue, and I just can't thank you all enough for doing that. I think for the most part, everybody stated their opinion with an honest and open heart, and that really means a lot to me. As a native son of Williamsburg, born and raised, that's the Williamsburg that I aspire to see in our future. In my history in Williamsburg, I think there's been some challenges, but for the most part, I didn't recognize it. Now, I'm just a white man in Williamsburg and didn't see what some of my good friends who grew up across the street had to deal with. But again, after listening to many of you in the community, I can see better today that the symbolism of this monument means something more to them than it does to me, and rightly so. For that, I don't see that there's a place for something like this on public property. That said, it is jointly owned by the United Daughters of the Confederacy, and I think that, I believe that they have a right, legally they have a right to take this, but they also have the right to mourn and respect their family members that died, as any of us do. So that, with that, I look forward to working with the UDC to find another home for that, as Ms. Ramsey pointed out. Whether they take it or not, there's going to be a significant expense, I don't know what significant is, to remove it, to destroy it. So there's going to be a burden for us to bear on that. I know that we've had some good conversations with the UDC, and happy that we are able to come to some agreement on that, and look forward to supporting the staff's recommendation as it's been presented.
So with that, I move that the City Council authorize the removal of the monument from Bicentennial Park, and that the council abandon its interest in the monument to the UDC, subject to the UDC taking possession of the monument prior to January 31st, 2021, and that if the UDC fails to take possession of the monument, that the city will consider the monument abandoned and dispose of the monument accordingly, and that the council authorizes the city manager to execute documents abandoning the city's interest to the UDC once the UDC takes possession of the monument and it is moved to the location identified by the UDC, and that the council authorizes the city manager to pay the reasonable cost of moving the monument to storage and then to the location identified by the UDC using his discretion for reasonable cost.
Second.
Ms. Felica, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Okay, that concludes our business today. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Ms. Felica, please.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Thank you all.